Let's be real for a second. Modern life feels like a pressure cooker, doesn't it? We're all trying to keep up, constantly connected, and just looking for something to help us cope. And that search has led a lot of us to rediscover some ancient remedies. One herb in particular is getting a ton of attention, ashwagandha. But here's the big question. Does it actually work, or is it just a bunch of hype? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at the science. I mean, it sure feels that way for a lot of people, right? That constant, low-level buzz of pressure, it can mess with everything. Our mood, our sleep, you name it. The hunt for a real solution is on, and that brings us to a really interesting class of herbs.
So ashwagandha is what's known as an adaptogen. And you can kind of think of an adaptogen like a thermostat for your body's stress response. Instead of just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms, these herbs are thought to help your body regulate itself to become more resilient to whatever life decides to throw at you. It's a pretty cool idea, but an idea like that, it needs proof.
So how in the world do you test an ancient herb with modern scientific tools? You've got to design an experiment that's sharp enough to cut through all the noise to separate what's real from what we want to be real. And luckily for us, in science, there's a gold standard for doing exactly that.
This right here is the whole ballgame. The study we're diving into is the gold standard. And that term, double-blind, it's absolutely crucial. It means that nobody, not the people in the study, and not even the researchers handing out the pills, knew who was getting the real ashwagandha and who was getting a fake. This little trick removes bias and gives us the clearest possible picture of what's really going on. The setup itself was actually pretty straightforward. First, they found 60 people who were already feeling pretty stressed out. Then, they randomly split them into 3 groups. And finally, they just tracked them for 2 months to see what happened. Simple, elegant, and really, really powerful.
And here are our 3 contenders. You've got one group getting a placebo, basically just a sugar pill, or in this case, a starch pill. Then the other 2 groups got ashwagandha. One got a low dose, the other got a high dose. This setup is brilliant because it lets us answer 2 huge questions. 1, does this stuff work better than nothing? And 2, does taking more of it actually make a bigger difference?
All right, the experiment is all set up. Now for the good part. Let's get to the results. And first up, the researchers asked the most direct question they could.
Because this is what it all comes down to, isn't it? You can forget all the theory and the fancy biochemistry for a second. The bottom line is, did taking this herb actually make people feel better in their day-to-day lives?
And the answer is a big, clear yes. Now, what's really fascinating here is that even the placebo group felt about 27% less stressed. That just shows you how powerful our minds can be. But the ashwagandha group saw even bigger drops. The high-dose group reported feeling almost 40% less stressed, and that difference, my friends, is statistically significant.
Okay, so people felt less stressed. That's huge. But was that just a feeling, or was something actually physically changing inside their bodies? To find out, the researchers had to measure the king of all stress hormones. This is where we get to the biological proof. See, cortisol is that hormone that floods your system when you're in that fight-or-flight mode. And if you're chronically stressed, your cortisol levels can get stuck on high, which is just terrible for your health. So the big question is, did ashwagandha actually manage to bring those levels back down?
Whoa. Okay, this chart right here is pretty incredible. Look at the placebo group. Their cortisol barely moved at all. But now look at the ashwagandha groups. The low dose dropped cortisol by more than 16%. And the high dose group, a massive 32.6% reduction. This isn't just a feeling anymore. This is a powerful, measurable biological effect.
Now let's see where this goes, because as we know, stress rarely shows up to the party alone. It usually brings its buddies, anxiety and poor sleep. So the researchers widened their investigation to see if ashwagandha could help out with those issues too.
Stress and anxiety are, well, they're like close cousins, but they're not exactly the same thing. So the researchers used a standard clinical scale for measuring anxiety to see if those positive effects we saw with stress would carry over. And this is where things get really interesting. We see some important details here. So, the low dose did reduce anxiety scores a bit, but the effect just wasn't big enough to be statistically significant when you compare it to the placebo. But the high dose, the 600 milligram dose, that was a completely different story. It produced a highly significant reduction in anxiety. So, it's pretty clear. Dosage really, really matters.
You know, the researchers themselves point this out. It's this vicious cycle, right?
Stress and anxiety totally wreck your sleep, but then not getting enough sleep makes you even more stressed and anxious. It just feeds on itself. To break that cycle, you have to improve sleep. So that leads us to the final piece of evidence.
For many of us, this might be the most important question of all. Could this ancient herb actually help us get a better night's rest? And the results here are just, wow, they're really striking. On this chart, a bigger bar means a bigger improvement in sleep quality. And yeah, the placebo group saw a little bump, about a 16% improvement, but both ashwagandha doses just blew it out of the water. The high dose led to a staggering 46% improvement in sleep quality. That is a huge deal.
Okay, so we've seen how people felt, we've looked at their actual stress hormones, and we've checked in on their anxiety levels and their sleep. I think it's time to put all the pieces together and deliver the final verdict.
So let's just quickly recap the key takeaways here. Ashwagandha worked. It reduced how stressed people felt, and it backed that feeling up by physically lowering their main stress hormone, cortisol. It also dramatically improved sleep quality. Now for anxiety, it really looks like that higher dose is what's needed. And maybe most importantly, it was found to be safe. No one reported any major side effects.
And that right there is the crucial point. This wasn't just in people's heads. The subjective feeling of, I feel less stressed, was matched step for step by objective, measurable reductions in the body's primary stress hormone. That's the connection that makes these findings so powerful.
Of course, we have to be responsible about this. One study is never the final word in science. The researchers themselves say they'd love to see these results confirmed in bigger studies that run for a longer time. But as a single piece of evidence, it is very, very strong.
So it leaves you with this kind of fascinating question, doesn't it? Here we have a study that applied our most rigorous modern scientific methods to an ancient herb, and it found that there's some real, hard science behind all that traditional wisdom. It just makes you wonder, what other powerful solutions might be out there, just waiting for us to rediscover them?